Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lunch Break Science. I'm Ariel Johnson from the Leakey Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting human evolution research and sharing discoveries in programs like this. We'd like to thank the Anna Gordon Getty Foundation and Camilla and George Smith, whose generous support made this episode of Lunch Break Science possible. Here with us today is Leakey Foundation Gordon Getty grant recipient and multi-grant recipient, Yohannes Haile-Selassie. Yohannes, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you for having me on this program, Ariel.
Yohannes is joining us from Cleveland, where he is curator of physical anthropology at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. Yohannes is one of the world's foremost authorities on paleoanthropology, and his search for our early ancestors in the Afar in Ethiopia, where he's director of the Woranso-Mille Paleontological Project. You'll see the Woranso-Mille area in this little drone video right here. Today, he'll be discussing what he and his team have discovered at the site. Before we get started, Yohannes, for those of you who are joining us live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or in Leakey Foundation Live and Facebook, you can post questions in the chat for Yohannes at any time, and he'll get to your questions at the end of the episode. The earlier you get those questions in, the more likely he will be able to answer them. So, Yohannes, I'm just so thrilled to have you on today. My first opportunity to work with you was a couple years, maybe like a year and a half ago, at a dinner that the Leakey Foundation was hosting at the Explorers Club. You were at the reception just as a guest and talking about the discovery that you'll be talking about later today. And it had just been published. And we asked you to do an impromptu talk after the dinner. And during the dinner, like, you didn't have anything. It was total surprise. You didn't have your laptop. So you and I worked together on putting together a presentation, and you gave this amazing talk. And it just made for such a magical evening.
I was really surprised how quickly you put those slides together, and I was like, "What? Did I do that, or Ariel did that?"
No, it was a good collaboration,
that was
and
amazing.
it wouldn't have been the same without the images.
Yeah.
But so, what is the significance of fossil ancestors in Ethiopia?
Well, as you know, when fossil discoveries are made, especially of early human ancestors, there is a lot of interest in the media, right? So any discovery is announced like all over the world. Everybody picks it up and talks about it. So when you think about Ethiopia, you probably know that it is really a religious country, and you would think that people would be like, we believe in God. We don't care about the fossils that are coming out of Ethiopia. But it's quite the opposite. Whenever fossils come out of Ethiopia and they're talked about all over the world, everybody is so happy, because for them it's like those fossils and being talked about all over the world builds the country's positive image, and it's called, everywhere in the world. So everybody is really proud, regardless of what religion they follow. They always like follow the news and get excited when new fossils come out of Ethiopia.
And I know when we had spoken earlier in kind of in preparing for this episode, you'd mentioned that you really feel responsibility as being from Ethiopia to really take a strong leadership role in paleoanthropology in Ethiopia.
Yeah, well, as you know, Ethiopia is one of the most important countries when it comes to research in human origins and evolution, because of all the sites in the Afar region of Ethiopia and also in the Omo Basin. But historically, Ethiopians were not really involved in the active research, paleoanthropological research. They were more like either antiquities officers or daily laborers. And that was really something that has made me think about, like, this has to change. And we need to have like Ethiopians actually participate in the scientific process and the discovery and the interpretation and so forth. And it took a very long time But today there are so many Ethiopians who have PhD, and they're leading projects like myself. And to see that kind of change in less than 20 years is really a major achievement. And we're all trying to make sure that there are more Ethiopians trained so that they can be the next generation of paleoanthropologists, Ethiopian paleoanthropologists. So we keep trying to train local scholars for that matter.
How did you become first interested in studying anthropology?
Good question. I'm not going to tell you that I was interested in anthropology as a child because my interest in anthropology started only after I got my first degree from Addis Ababa University in history. And of course, when I graduated, my chances were to become a history teacher somewhere in rural Ethiopia. But the year that I graduated, luckily, there were four positions from the Ministry of Culture that they wanted for new graduates, for the Ministry of Culture. And because those places are really rare to find, what they did was there were 45 students who graduated that year, and the way they had to decide which four will get the Ministry of Culture job was through lottery. So we had to pick up a lottery, and one of the four I picked up luckily, and that's how I ended up at the Ministry of Culture. And I was hired as a historian, and the department that I was assigned to was actually involved in restoration of cultural heritage. And what they had to do was first, before they restore the heritage, they send a historian to actually do the history of that heritage. And though that's what took me for the first time after I graduated to northern Ethiopia, to one of the islands on Lake Tana, which is the largest lake in Ethiopia. And this is actually the first report that I submitted after my trip, and it was really the beginning of, like, what is research. I felt like I was doing research as a historian, but that changed really quickly. I was there for like 2.5 years, and it was also about that time when the National Museum of Ethiopia was actually just had a new paleoanthropology lab, and they were moving all these fossils to the new lab, and they really wanted more, manpower, and they had to transfer me from where I was in the restoration department to the paleo anthropology lab. So technically, that was the first time that I was able to see fossils, real fossils, like in drawers. And
Oh, yeah.
looking at them, you go like, "What are these? Why do we have all this, rock-looking bones?" And that's when I started getting interested in trying to figure out what these bones are or what they mean. And it took a while before I could actually think about, like, okay, these are like animals, not humans. But how did humans come? Are there human fossils? And of course, there were human fossils, but they were separately kept, like in vaults and in safes that I don't have any access. But that is really the moment that my interest in paleoanthropology was really triggered. And then I had to, few years later, I started joining projects that were going out to the field. And the first time I went to the field was with this survey and exploration project that was organized by Dr. Brahani Asfaw, who just got back from UC Berkeley with his PhD, and he started this project to look for sites, new sites, paleoanthropological interest. And I joined them, and in a couple years, I was like finding fossils, and to the extent that they actually allowed me to even excavate the cranium of a hippopotamus that you saw. This is like about 1.5 million years old hippopotamus cranium. So I was already like really into it before I even went to graduate school. So in 1990 was when we first went back to the Middle Awash with my former advisor, Professor Tim White, and I started getting fossils, finding fossils, and they looked some, potential in me being a paleoanthropologist. And that's when I went to graduate school at UC Berkeley, and I graduated in 2001. But my goal when I graduated was, okay, I'm working with this project as a member, but obviously, do I want to stay like just a member of a project, or do I want to find a site of my own where I can lead and where I can supervise, where I can do the analysis and so forth. And that's when I started survey and exploration with permission from the Ministry of Culture. And I had to survey and explore the northern part of Ethiopia, which is like thousands of square miles wide. And I did this for like 3 years. I had to look for new site for 3 years in a row. And it was toward the end of my field and my survey exploration that we hit Woranso-Mille. And this was like on the very last day, driving back to the city through the Afar, and about 4:30 in the afternoon, we were on a high ground, and we look at the sediments way far out there, which looked really beautiful with the 4:30 p.m. light. They were like shiny, and we decided to check them out. And we talked to the local people. That's when we were checking the sediments from distance, and we talked to the local guys, and they said, "Well, yeah, there are some fossils out there," but we had to cross. It was really late in the day, so we
Yeah.
had to go to the river, park the cars close to the Mille River, which is a perennial river that runs across the Woranso-Mille field site now. And we checked just one spot, which we saw that it was the surface was loaded with fossils, and we said, okay, let's get out of here. Let's come back tomorrow because it's too late, right? So we went back the next day, and luckily, we found some specimens that were really, really informative about how old the sediments are. And what you're seeing me holding here is a primitive suet called Nyanzaceras jejurai, which we know existed before 3.7 million years ago. So that was really an important clue in terms of how old the sediments are. So at that point, I made in my mind like, okay, I'm going to go back to Addis, ask for proper permit from the government, and establish a project here. That's how it all started. So in 2005 was the first time that I went back to Woranso-Mille. It was a full-fledged project with a lot of people, not like two or three like during the survey years. And luckily, 2005, the first year of a full-blown field season, we found a partial skeleton, which is nicknamed Kadanumu, right? Which is 3.6 million years old, partial skeleton of Australopithecus afarensis. And this is like the excavation site that you're seeing here in 2005. So we were really happy, even if we didn't find anything else. I mean, you have a partial skeleton already at the beginning of the
Oh,
project.
yeah.
So that was really exciting, especially as we kept on working at other places nearby within the study area, and we started finding more fossils. And today we have about 13,500 specimens collected from the site in the last 15 field seasons, and out of which about 230 or 240 of them are early human ancestors, dating back all the way to 3.8 million years ago, and some of them are as young as 3 million years ago. So we have like a time period of about 800,000 years of our human evolutionary history represented here at Woranso-Mille. And the key thing about Woranso-Mille is it samples time periods that were not known anywhere else, particularly between 3.6 and 3.8. So that's why Woranso-Mille has become one of the most significant paleoanthropological sites that we have currently when it comes to human evolutionary studies, and I'm really happy to work there.
Did you when you first, were looking at some of the fossils and the sediments, were you just like, this is it, like right away? Or did it take a little, because it took you 3 years to find the site?
Yes, just think about this. You've been doing this survey for like 3 years
Yeah.
without seeing anything, right? Because some of these days, the survey days, I had to walk for like 12 hours nonstop to transit from one place to another, just looking for the sediments which may have fossils, right? And we rarely saw fossils north of Woranso-Mille, okay, because it's not the right sediments. They're old, but they don't have any fossils. What that means is that these animals were not living there. Maybe the environment was not conducive for animals to live in. So, but that's the way it is. You have to do all of the effort that you have to to find a new site. That's the name of the game. But as I said, we were lucky to find Woranso-Mille, and it turns out to be the best site. And we now have a huge project which involves about 20 scientists and so many local participants And so far, in the last 15 years of field season, we have about 378 people who have already
Wow.
participated in this project. Yes.
Well, I'm
So
really
it's really
excited to
challenging.
hear more about Woranso-Mille and what
Yeah.
you and your colleagues have found there. So let's
Yeah.
turn the virtual floor over to you and dig deeper.
Okay.
It's got to be just so thrilling to actually, spend all this time, searching and then find a site and then be able to have such amazing discoveries, come from it. So you are all set. I'm going to see you on the other side of your presentation.
Okay. So Woranso-Mille is really very interesting site, not only in terms of the, the the number of fossils that we're collecting from the site, but also the age that it represents, being like middle Pliocene, from about 3 million years to about 3.8, a little bit older than 3.8 million years ago. So whatever fossils we're finding, especially of early human ancestors from this site, have been really critical in answering some of the outstanding questions that we have about early hominid evolution, particularly in relation to Lucy's species, Australopithecus afarensis, and its ancestor, Australopithecus anamensis. So when you think about human origin studies, this continent always comes to mind, Africa. And this is where we have almost all of the fossil evidence from the last 6 to 7 million years of our evolutionary history. And there are certain areas in Africa that are yielding fossil remains, and South Africa being one of them. But most of the fossils that we have for early human ancestor studies come from the East African Rift System. But of all these places, the Afar region of Ethiopia is really one of the most significant sites, because this is an area where we have a continuous record of the last 6 million years of our evolutionary history, and it's attracted so many paleoanthropologists in the last 50 years or so. And there are so many projects that are currently conducting research in this part of the world. And one would wonder, why is this really an important area? And this is a Google Earth image that I want to show you. And on the right corner that you would see, there is what is called the Afar triangle. This is literally the Afar Rift system. This is the Afar Rift, and this is an area where you have three different plates of the Earth moving apart from each other, like in different directions, opening this huge trove and exposing, as you can imagine, ancient deposits that have been buried there for millions of years back into the surface because of geological phenomena such as erosion and also tectonic activities, earth movements that happen and still happening in this part of the world. So within the Afar Triangle is where we have so many famous paleoanthropological sites that we've been working at for the last 50 years now. And most of these famous sites are located on the western flank, western side of the triangle. And within this rectangle that you're seeing highlighted here, there are all these famous sites such as Middle Awash, Hadar, Gona, Dikika, and Lady Gararu, Mille Logia, and Woranso-Mille are relatively new sites added to the older ones, because research in this area started in the early 1970s. But what really attracted paleoanthropologists to this part of the world is the discovery of Lucy in 1974. And since then, research projects have been expanding the research into deeper time, particularly in the Middle Awash, where we have the about 1 kilometer thick set of deposits that sample the entire 6 million years of our evolutionary history. So with the discovery of Australopithecus afarensis at Hadar in 1972, we realized that early human ancestors were really old, as old as 3 million years, because at that time, all the evidence that we had was from South Africa. And the oldest that we had was about 3 million years with Australopithecus africanus fossils. But then Hadar really attracted so many researchers to the region, and the expansion of the survey and exploration and research further to the south, to the Middle Awash area, was really important. And we have the entire sequence that samples the last 6 million years, and it's from this region of Afar that we have so many species that are, some of which are unique to the Afar region, but some others also found from other regions. So to highlight the significance of the Afar region in human evolution studies, what you're seeing here is a relatively complete set of human ancestors that we have in the fossil record. Obviously, there are a few that I didn't add into this, but when you look at the record from the Afar region of Ethiopia, this is what you see. And if you follow the time with Ardipithecus cadabra at the bottom, it literally covers the last 6 million years of our evolutionary history. So it's really, really amazing place. And that's why there are so many projects still going on in this part of Africa, in this part of the Afar Rift. So Woranso-Mille is actually one of these sites that are yielding new fossils, and some of which are actually shown here, and I'll talk a little bit in detail about them. And when we started the work at Woranso-Mille, obviously you can see it's further north from all the known sites such as Harar, Gona, Dikika, and Middle Awash. But it's really an interesting site because of the time period that it represents. Some of it overlaps with the sites in the south, but some of the sections are unique to this part of the world. So we're lucky to find those sediments so that we have a more complete record of the human story with these discoveries that are coming out of Woranso-Mille. So at Woranso-Mille, so far, we have identified at least 3 species of early human ancestors. One is Australopithecus anamensis, which has been known from 3.9 to 4.2 million years ago, from mostly from sites in the Turkana Basin, Alia Bay, and Kanapoy, but also from the Afar region, from Middle Awash at Asaisi at about 4.1, 4.2 million years ago. So here we have it at about 3.8 million years ago, which is really interesting by itself, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it later. But we also have a new species that we named from the site called Australopithecus deiremida. And I will also discuss the significance of that new species in a moment. We also have Afarensis, which is known not only from the Afar region, but also from the Turkana Basin and further to the south from Laetoli, where the type specimen of the species actually comes from. But we also have this unique partial foot called the Burtele foot, which was also a surprising discovery given what we knew at that time and also the age of this foot. So all of these are like what I will highlight in terms of why are they significant in the study of human origins. So the first one is this partial skeleton that we found in 2005 of Australopithecus anamensis, nicknamed Kadanumu. Now, this is about 40% complete, and what is really interesting about this partial skeleton is it provides us with elements or areas of the skeleton that were not known much based on the skeletal remains from Hadar or anywhere else. Like the complete scapula, we didn't have a complete scapula of Australopithecus afarensis until the discovery of Kadanumu. So we've been able to extrapolate a lot of data from this new discovery. Even though we have so many specimens of Australopithecus afarensis known, the significance of this partial skeleton lies in the fact that it samples some of the areas, some of the skeletal regions that we didn't have much knowledge about from what we have in the fossil record. The next one is the Burtele partial foot. This is about 3.3 to 3.4 million years ago. And this is really important in its own way because given its age of 3.3 to 3.4 million years ago and having, as you can see on this slide, opposable big toe, it's really, this is a little bit faster, but I guess it's the setup. So I will talk a little bit about this. And the second one is this new species, Australopithecus deiremida, and the third one is the Australopithecus anamensis specimen that I'm going to talk about a little bit. So this was timed a little bit weird, but anyway, so those are like the 3 specimens that I'm going to highlight in terms of why are they really significant and what do they add to our knowledge of human origins and evolution. So the Burtele foot, as I said, is really unique. not because it has opposable big toe, but because it's from younger deposits. Now, when you think about opposable big toe, you start thinking about like, well, didn't we see like opposable big toe in this species known as Ardipithecus ramidus? You remember that partial skeleton of Ardipithecus ramidus? It had opposable big toe, but it's 4.4 million years old, right? Now we're talking about a specimen that is a million years younger. And it's also a specimen that comes from a geological age where we have a lot of Australopithecus afarensis remains, which we know what didn't have opposable big toe, as I will show you later. So Lucy's species, Australopithecus afarensis, was a bipedal. It did not have opposable big toe. We know that from footprints that some of its members left about 3.6 million years ago at Laetoli in Tanzania. And what you're seeing here on this slide are the footprints of Australopithecus afarensis at Laetoli from 3.6 million years ago. So there is no way that Burtele partial foot with that opposable big toe could have made this footprints, right? So at 3.4, 3.3 million years ago, we have another species with a different mode of locomotion from Lucy's that existed at about 3.3 to 3.4 million years ago, overlapping with Australopithecus afarensis. Just something that we never thought would happen in the fossil record. The next one, so this is a comparison between the Burtele partial foot, which looks very much like the Ardipithecus ramidus foot that I was talking about. So the next one is Australopithecus ramida. This is a species that we named in 2015 based on a few specimens, some of which are shown here. And we noted that this specimens have some characters, dental characters and jaw characters that are different from Australopithecus afarensis. And in our analysis, we were convinced that this is something that belongs to a species different from Australopithecus afarensis. Now, I have to mention that the Burtele foot comes from the same locality as some of the specimens of Australopithecus ramida, but we refrained from assigning the Burtele foot into the species until we find more convincing evidence, particularly from the cranial region, that could be clearly associated with the foot so that we can be confident enough in assigning it to the species. But that hasn't happened yet, but we have specimens that have been recovered in the last 3 years or so, and we're still doing the analysis. So we'll see what we'll find out when we finish the analysis. But this new species had its own significance as much as what I was mentioning for the Burtele partial foot. So this was published in 2015, and obviously, as you can see from the title of the paper, it's about hominin diversity. So if you have more than one species living at the same time, that means there was some kind of diversity. It was not always one species at a time. So this is the first time that we had conclusive evidence, particularly with the Burtele foot, that there was another species living side by side with Australopithecus afarensis in the Afar region of Ethiopia. So new discoveries from new areas are really interesting because they not only answer old questions that you may have, but they also bring new questions, right? And that's really the dynamics of paleoanthropology. That's the why studying human origins and evolution is really significant, right? So when you ask like, what's the significance of this new species that we're finding from Woranso-Mille and not anywhere else, there are two things that I can mention here. One is it gives us a conclusive evidence for the presence of more than one hominin species between 3.3 and 3.5 million years ago. Now, we do have other evidence from other areas, like from the Turkana Basin, we have Kenyanthropus platypus, which is about from the same time. We also have Australopithecus Bahr el-Ghazali from Chad in Central Africa, which is also within the same time period. But there are some disagreement in terms of the validity of those taxa, as much as there is some disagreement with the validity of Australopithecus ramida. But what really makes the Woranso-Mille evidence more convincing is the Burtele foot, because none of the other species that lived at the same time had opposable big toe. At least Lucy didn't have that. Lucy's species didn't have that. So that's really more convincing. So we can raise this point based on what we have at the Burtele site. But the other important point that you can mention here is that related early hominid species were living at the same time in close geographic proximity. This is really interesting because we never had that kind of relationship from any of the other sites anywhere else in Eastern Africa where we have early hominid fossil evidence. So that's why one of the reasons why the Woranso-Mille discoveries are really, really significant. The One of the questions that we raised because of all these new discoveries from Woranso-Mille is that how do all this related hominid taxa coexist? Because we're talking about like if there could there be like competitive exclusion? How is it possible that they could live like together without any problems, without one pushing the other? And that's also another question that we need to address, right? And this is one of the questions that we're actively working on, and it has to do with like how they were, either partitioning the environment, or if they were okay living together, like doing the same thing, and maybe there were plenty of resources for them, so that they don't have to compete. Those are the kinds of hypotheses that we were trying to test using the other lines of evidence that we have from the site. Now, the other more recent discovery is the what we call the MRD cranium. This is a discovery that was made in 2016. Um, I got to tell you that this is one of the most complete and undistorted crania that has ever been discovered in the fossil record, older than 3 million years. And it was really exciting to find it because we were able to learn more about what this specimen belongs to and what it means in terms of how we interpret our understanding of early human evolution, particularly during the Middle Pliocene. So the MRD cranium started with this discovery of the upper jaw, which was discovered by a local Afar guy, Ali Barreno. And about 3 meters away from it, there was the rest of the head, which which was really interesting. He probably thought that it was some kind of a rock, so he recognized the teeth, but not the rest of the cranium. But when I saw it, obviously it was clear to me that those two pieces would join, and I picked it up, and when I tried it, it was a perfect join. So that was when I couldn't believe what I was seeing, because this is we know that this was really old, and even looking at it, it just doesn't look like anything that I have seen before. So we know that it was going to be something very, very interesting. But as it's always the case with fossils, you don't find them complete. There's always something missing, right? And as paleoanthropologists, we don't usually pick up whatever we find on the ground and run away, particularly for specimens like this. And we had to do the usual crawling, sifting, and excavation sometimes. But in this case, it did not require excavation, but it did require a lot of sieving and picking, so that we can recover the remaining pieces in case they're there. They just broke and fell off, and they were like in the dirt. So it took us a few days to actually sift the sediments there, and we were rewarded with like 4 or 5 pieces that were really, really crucial to make the cranium more complete. So what we had at the beginning were the 2 pieces, and as you can see here, it doesn't have the orbital margins, and you can't really see the face that much without those regions. And we were really lucky when we found those 4 pieces that actually joined the left orbit. As you can see here, those four pieces were really critical. And once you have these pieces, thanks to technology, you can do a lot of things, right? You can reconstruct the remaining pieces on the right side using what's preserved on the left side. So what we did was we got it CT scanned and did the reconstruction, and you end up with this beautiful cranium, which is very interesting, not only in terms of its completeness, but also the morphology that we're seeing on this specimen. And it now gives us a great idea on the cranial anatomy of Australopithecus afarensis, which we didn't have much knowledge about. And it's also based on those kinds of reconstructions that you can actually have the first glimpse of the face of Australopithecus anamensis. And John Gertschy, a paleoartist who's been doing this for many years, was commissioned to do the reconstruction, and he came up with a really, really great reconstruction, flesh reconstruction of this cranium, and that's what he gave us in the end. And now we can compare what the face of Lucy looks like relative to its ancestor Australopithecus anamensis. But beyond that, what is the significance of this cranium? Just think about the geological age of this specimen. It's about 3.8 million years ago. And it's assigned to Australopithecus anamensis, which is the ancestor of Australopithecus afarensis, Lucy species. Now, previously, because the hypothesis is Australopithecus anamensis is a linear ancestor of Australopithecus afarensis. And that hypothesis has been accepted for many years because there is nothing to falsify it, particularly when you don't have any fossils between 3.6 and 3.9 million years ago. Now, here you have a specimen that is assigned to Australopithecus anamensis at 3.8, which kind of brings it to the overlap range with Australopithecus afarensis. And what you're seeing is Australopithecus anamensis as the ancestor, what has always been considered as the direct linear ancestor of Australopithecus afarensis, but with the discovery of the 3.8 million year old Australopithecus anamensis, what we realize is that those two species had actually overlapped for about 100,000 years, between 3.8 and 3.9 million years ago. Now, that's really interesting because it changed the way we think about the mode of evolution. Was it really linear, or is it like, was there a possibility where the ancestor and the descendant had overlapped in time for some time? Like, they may not be like at the same place, but they could be like geographically isolated and evolving separately until the ancestor goes extinct. So this is the 100,000 years overlap is based on what we know now. But at the same time, I got to mention that we don't really know where the first Australopithecus anamensis appeared in the fossil record. For now, we think it's about 4.2, but is that really the first occurrence or the first appearance date of that species? Nor do we know when it went extinct before giving rise to Australopithecus anamensis or overlapping with Australopithecus anamensis. At the same time, we don't really know when the earliest Australopithecus afarensis occurred. Right now, it's about 3.8 million years ago, based on evidence from Laetoli in Tanzania, but it could be 3.8 or it could be earlier. So those are dependent on further discoveries that we make in the fossil record. So all of this is really great stuff that's coming out of Woranso-Mille, and recently we've been trying to explore and survey younger deposits from about 3.2 million years ago and slightly younger. And this is really important time because this is about the time when Australopithecus afarensis is going extinct or disappearing from the fossil record, and very close to the earliest origin of the genus Homo, which we now have at 2.8 at Lady Gararu. So it's really going to be a very interesting time period, particularly in relation to the origin of Homo. And we've started finding some clues of early human ancestors from these younger deposits, but this is just something that we started really recently, and there's going to be a lot of work and a lot of collection to be done. And obviously, we're expecting a lot of surprises from that time period too. So as we keep doing the research, we're gonna probably learn a lot more about not only the evolution of this earlier human ancestors, but also the origin of the genus Homo. Now, I got to mention that all of this is because of a concerted effort by so many scientists. So many people are involved in all of this, in the research, in the analysis, in the discovery, and all of that. And this is not a field where one person can do anything at all. So this is like a combined effort of so many scientists. And I got to give the credit to all of the people who are involved in this project and resulting in those kinds of amazing discoveries from the site. And I also want to thank all of these granting agencies that have been supporting our research, particularly Leakey Foundation. I mean, I've received grants since 2002, and I think I've received grants for like 8 times now, and I really thank the Leakey Foundation for that. And there are others like the National Science Foundation, and early on like Woranso-Mille Foundation and National Geographic, and also my institution, the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. So as we keep continuing the work, we'll let the world know what we're finding out and what we're learning about our evolutionary history. So I'll get it back to you, Ariel.
Well, thank you so much. Now is the time to get those questions into the chat. So if you have a question, put it in the chat. And I actually have an initial question for you because this talk kind of leads up to our Darwin Week celebrations next week. And you'll be back on February 13th for a very special program we'll be having on Saturday called A Most Interesting Problem, which kind of is a reflection on what Darwin got right and wrong about human evolution. How did you get involved in the project, Yohannes? And what kind of comes to mind when you think of Darwin and his impact on what we know about evolution now?
Well, let me say that when you think about what would have Darwin said if he had all these fossils that we have today, could he have made the mistakes that he made in terms of some of the sequences in our evolutionary history? That's what I always think. But Charles Darwin was like a genius, and I have to say that fossils actually triggered his ideas all about evolution. Fossils were the key, regardless of whether it was about hominins. But the general idea of evolution sparked to him because of the fossils that he saw and found on his trip on the Beagles. So, having said that, I think I got involved in this project when Jerry, who is the editor of the book, invited me. We're doing this, and it would be really great if you could write a chapter on Charles Darwin and the fossil evidence. Like we know he's predicted like the sequence of events in our evolutionary history. Today we know that some of them were not the right sequence, but with the fossil evidence, we can say why he was not right. And since I'm a paleoanthropologist and I have a lot of familiarity with the fossil evidence, Jerry wanted me to write something. So why don't you write like a review on his chapter Darwin's chapter 4, which is where he talks about human origins in the descent of man. And I said, well, that's really great. And I tried to make it as comprehensible as possible to the general public. It wasn't really technical. And for me, it was really a good opportunity to actually share that with the general public. Whoever reads that book would have a better idea in terms of why we think Darwin was right in a lot of ways, but there were some things that he was wrong. So that was really an interesting area to work on. And I agreed. I said, yeah, I'll contribute. So that's how I ended up writing one chapter.
Well, we are looking forward to hearing more about this next weekend, and we'll be sharing the link to register for this event in the chat. So now we will be taking some questions from the audience. Could we please show the map and location of the drone shot again? Okay, so I'll pull up the drone, and maybe you could talk a little bit about the area.
Okay. This is an area from the younger part of the sequence at Woranso-Mille. It looks like really flat because most of this were like lake deposits. So they just settled there, and it looks like they were not really affected by a lot of tectonics here. So we're talking about like sediments that are younger than 3.2, 3.3 million years ago. The older sections have a totally different topography than what you're seeing here because there are lots of volcanic eruptions, lots of various tuffs, like some of the geological formations that we use for dating. But this area that you saw in the drone footage is actually really flat, and it's all lake sediments. So yeah.
We have another question from the audience. Are there any other regions in the world with similar geographical tectonic circumstances that excite you for potential excavation?
Who wants another one when you have like the best one, But obviously, all of the East African rift system is tectonically active because the rift is still opening. It's getting wider because those plates of the earth are still moving as we speak, right? So there will be lots of places that have those tectonic activities. But I think if you asked me, like, would you rather go somewhere else? I would say no. I have the best site that I can work for as long as I can work at this site.
Well, that's good. Okay. Let's see here. We have another one. What would you like to know most about the Australopithecines?
One of the key things that I would like to know about Australopithecines is which, if any, of the Australopithecus species gave rise to the genus Homo. That's like one of the most important questions that we have, because it boils down to where do we come from?
Yeah.
And as members of the genus Homo, we have to really know more about where that genus started. And that's why this younger deposits, like younger than 3.2 and 3 million years, become really, really interesting. And that's the shift that I just mentioned, that we've been recently exploring those younger deposits, because with the discovery of a 2.8 million year old early Homo representative at Liligararo, it became more interesting to actually look for early human ancestor fossils from that area, from that time period, around 3 million years, because if you have it at 2.8, there's a chance that it may have originated before 2.8, right? So that's what really makes it interesting to actually look in sediments slightly older than 2.8 to see if Homo actually originated before what the record indicates right now.
We have another question. Great to see you. I hope you have to see you on my show one day too. My question is, which of your many discoveries do you think has had the largest impact on the field?
I would say the Portelle foot. But that's not the only one. And MRD has its own impact in its own ways. And those are like the reason why I said MRD foot, the BRT foot, is because that is something that every paleoanthropologist would agree that is different from Australopithecus afarensis. It's not like Australopithecus remeda, who some of my colleagues would argue, well, it's just another variant of Australopithecus afarensis, or with the MRD cranium and our suggestion of it overlapped with Australopithecus afarensis, they could still argue like, well, it's just one specimen, you have to find more. But with the Portelle foot, it really made a difference in terms of how old it is and what kind of locomotor adaptation it had and who was already there living, like Australopithecus afarensis. So that's why I think that is the most interesting specimen that we've ever discovered at the site.
I'm sorry. Let's get the next. We have another question. We have quite a few questions, so we won't get to all of them, but it's in the process of making its way. This is from Haile-Selassie, who was on the episode 6 of Lunch Break Science. So it's good to see you watching more episodes. To what extent is your field research impacted by COVID-19?
Well, COVID-19.
Hi, Haile.
Hi, Haile. Yeah. So COVID-19 not only affected our field research, but also our laboratory research. We can't even go to the city in Addis, because right now I think it's spreading even more, even in the cities like Addis. So it did impact all of the work that we do as paleoanthropologists as much as it did everybody else who travels and who does research other places. So its impact is really tremendous, but there is nothing we can do, right? Let's just hope that we all get vaccination soon so that we can travel again, and that's what I can say at this point.
Well, everybody watching, be sure to check out Haile-Selassie episode of Lunch Break Science too. His research is really interesting.
It was very good.
Yeah. Okay. How divergent is the big toe of the Portelle foot? Is it as divergent as that of Ardi, or more intermediate between that and Australopithecus afarensis?
Well, I'm not sure if Australopithecus afarensis had a divergent toe, because if it had divergent toe, it wouldn't have made the Laetoli footprints. So what I can say in terms of the comparison between the Portelle foot and Ardipithecus ramidus foot is that they both show signs of divergence of the big toe, and that's based on the morphology of the big toe elements. So it's not really about how much divergent it is. If it's divergent, then they're not walking the same way as Lucy was doing. So in other words, they were not putting a lot of weight, or they were not toeing off, as it's appropriate to say, like humans do, or like afarensis was doing. So the degree of divergence is not really what we're really interested. But functionally speaking, they were doing the same thing, which is they were not toeing off from the big toe. And that's really the most important thing that makes them very similar.
We have one or two more questions that we'll be able to take. Let's take a look at the next one. It's on its way. Can you tell anything about the climate in Ethiopia 3 to 6 million years ago?
Okay, well, 3 million years is a very long time, so
Yeah.
there must have been like different kinds of environment at different times. But what I can tell you is that when you look at the evidence and use like different proxies, it depends on what site you're talking about. For example, if you're thinking about like the 6 million years region in the Middle Awash, for example, where I have been actively working, there are indications that some of them were like woodland, some of them they were like open grasslands, not as much as what you see in later times, but in general, there seems to be an indication that there was a lot of heterogeneity in the environment as much as we see today. It's all about like which parts of this heterogeneous environment were this early human ancestors occupying. That's the key question that we always ask, because all of these types of environment, they were there, but which one of these environments were these early human ancestors occupying is really the key question that we always try to answer. But to just give you a short answer, between 3 and 6 million years ago, the environment has been as heterogeneous as we know it even today.
We have one last question. You are deeply involved with the community members living around your research sites. Can you talk about the school you support and the children that attend?
Well, thanks for asking this question, Charles. Um, when you work with local people who don't have access to education, which a lot of us take for granted, you start thinking like, what's the future of these kids? And the second thing is you work with these people, you collect fossils from their area, you make yourself a name, you make a lot of progress in science, but what are they getting back? And one of the ways that I could think of giving back to these local people was, what if I help in, making sure that their kids are educated and have a better future? And that's when I decided to create this small foundation called Kokeo Foundation, and tried to help this little school they have there, and renovate it and put proper like desks and everything that they need as a school. And the Kokeo Foundation has been doing really well in terms of making sure that these kids actually learn in good classrooms like what you're seeing here. And it's really interesting. The Leakey Foundation members were there to see it actually, and I was really happy that some of them were able to help. And we're now thinking about building another school in the second village, Waitaleta, which you guys have also seen. And we're in the process of raising funds to do that. But we're almost there to make sure that there is another school, because there are like 750 kids in those two villages, and you can imagine how you can plan even teaching all of these kids just with three classrooms that are like 8 miles away from each other, in a village that are 8 miles away from each other. So having a second school at Waitaleta, which is the name of the village, would be really important, so that the kids in Waki, which is the other village, can go there, and the kids at Waitaleta would learn there. So it is all about giving back to the community that we work with, and that's one of the most important things that we have to do as paleoanthropologists, I think, not just in Ethiopia, but also other places that we go to.
Well, it's just I'm just so excited to hear just about this about, I mean, because you really think, I think, from beginning to end really thoroughly about every aspect of your research, including the community, that surrounds it. Before we end, though, I'd like to ask you one quick question to end on, which is, do you have any advice for those viewers who are watching who might be interested in pursuing anthropology or paleoanthropology as a career?
Well, my advice would be to students, would be paleoanthropologist students, and not to the people who are already paleoanthropologists. So what I would say is, to be a paleoanthropologist, you have to be really interested in where we came from. I mean, that's like a very fundamental question. But it requires, a lot more effort than you think, particularly when you realize that it's not just about studying fossils, because you sit down in your lab and study fossils, whoever brings them from the field, right? But a real paleoanthropologist would actually go find the fossils, and doing that requires a lot of physical, mental, and social preparedness, right? Because it's not like you go to a place where there is, like, every convenience store that you would like to access and stuff like that. You go stay in a, in a camp in the middle of nowhere, and you're probably exposed to like 120 degrees. All of this, and the culture shock, because you're going to work with people that you've never thought meeting, right? So it requires a lot of preparation, but if you're determined, you can do it. And that's the key thing: determination and persistence. And above all, you have to be really interested. It's not about, like, what am I going to be when I graduate if I was like a paleoanthropologist, because we never think about those kinds of things when you're interested in doing things.
Yeah.
What kind of job am I going to find? Those are the things that you won't think about at the beginning, but obviously down the line they might impact how you do in your life. But if you're really interested, you can do it, as long as you have the interest, which is the key to your success. um, that's Otherwise, there are still lots of places that people can explore and survey and find fossils of their own. But most importantly, there are so many fossils yet to be found, which are a really great way to encourage students to come into the field and study fossils, like what we're doing now. Lots of opportunities.
Well, again, just thank you so much, Yohannes. It's been such a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to have you on Lunch Break Science.
Thanks for having me again.
So you can visit us at leakeyfoundation.org to learn more about the Leakey Foundation, Yohannes Haile-Selassie, as well as how you can help support research like Yohannes's and educational programs like Lunch Break Science. We have a very special match going on right now for Darwin Week, which is a quadruple any donations. Next week, we'll be celebrating Darwin's 212th birthday, starting off with a episode of Lunch Break Science on February 11th, featuring scientist Jeremy De Silva, who'll be talking about bipedal walking and how Darwin impacted how we understand evolution. Then on Saturday, February 13th, we'll be having a spectacular lineup of scholars exploring Darwin's ideas about evolution in the light of modern science. There'll be 6 short presentations with opportunities for questions, and then award-winning science journalist Ann Gibbons will be leading a discussion with all the scholars. Be sure to subscribe to the Leakey Foundation's YouTube channel, follow us on Facebook and Twitter, or sign up for our newsletter to be the first to hear about upcoming episodes and groundbreaking discoveries in human evolution research. Still hungry for science and can't wait till February 11th? Origin Stories, our podcast, just released our 50th episode, Understanding Neanderthals, featuring archaeologist Rebecca Rang Sykes. So be sure to check it out. Origin Stories is available wherever you listen to podcasts. Lunch Break Science is made possible by the generous support of Ann and Gordon Getty and Camilla and George Smith. Thank you all for taking a break from your day and feeding your brain with the Leakey Foundation. Until next time, stay hungry for knowledge. Bye.